Heart of a Champion, page 23, chapter 9. Once Little League started, Jimmy and I couldn't meet at Henry Ford. His team played on Tuesday night and Saturday afternoon. Mine played on Wednesday and Sunday, so it didn't work out. We still saw each other, though, because we'd go to each other's games whenever we could. The major leagues played at the Kiwanis Field. They had a permanent bleachers, dugouts, outfield fences, and the distances marked. Groundskeepers chalked the foul lines in the batter's box before every game. They dragged the infield to pick up loose rocks, and on hot days they watered to keep the dust down. The major leaguers had full uniforms, caps, jerseys, pants, socks. The minors were different. We played at Ben Franklin School. No bleachers, no dugouts, no benches. They put the lines down and dragged the infield at the start of the season, and that was it for the year. Even the outfield was second rate. Left and center had good deep fences, but about 50 feet behind the infield and right was a sloping bank covered with bushes. A lazy fly ball could reach that bank. They couldn't give a home run for such a measly hit, so any ball that reached the bank was a ground rule double. On Tuesdays and Saturdays, I go to Kiwanis Field and watch Jimmy play. It should have been fun, but it wasn't. Mr. Winter would go berserk whenever any call went against Jimmy. That was no strike. He was safe. Are you blind, Ump, or are you just stupid? There were other red-faced fathers at the game, but Mr. Winter screamed loudest and longest. I wondered how Jimmy felt hearing his dad screaming. That season, I measured myself against Jimmy. If he got 2 hits on Saturday, then I wanted 3 on Sunday. If he drove in a run Tuesday, then I wanted 2 RBIs on Wednesday. When he had a big day, it would pump me up, but sometimes it worked the other way. If he'd gone 0 for 4, I'd get it in my head that I was going to have a bad game. In baseball, if you think negative is what you get. Jimmy didn't have many bad games, so chasing him made me the star of Ang's Palace Mets. That and the short bank in right field because of Mr. Winter's coaching, I was good at going to the opposite field. Fly balls to right that should have been easy outs would plop down in the bushes on the bank, and I'd be standing at second. They were Mickey Mouse doubles, but nobody could have told me that. At the start of the season, my mother took a picture of me in uniform, bat cocked, tough guy look on my face. I glued that picture to a piece of cardboard. After every game, I'd go home and write down my stats in a notebook I kept in my drawer. At the end of the year, I planned to make a baseball card of myself, at-bats, hits, runs, RBIs, the whole thing. Then the last week of the season, magic struck. The phone rang. I'd been called up by Woodside Plaza Merchants, Jimmy's team. Only 1 game remained in the season, but that didn't matter. I'd made the majors. Jimmy was almost as happy as I was. I told you, he kept saying, "Didn't I tell you they call you up?" I was sky high the whole week. I didn't crash until I got to the park and discovered I wasn't in the starting lineup. I spent that game on the far corner of the bench waiting, but when Woodside Plaza was up, Jimmy would talk to me. But I could barely answer. The lump in my throat was that big. I kept looking at the coach, wondering if I'd ever get in. In the bottom of the 5th, he pointed toward me. "Steve, grab a bat. You're pinch hitting for the pitcher." I looked around. "Me?" "Yeah, you. Get up there." I grabbed my bat and raced to the on-deck circle. "Good luck," Jimmy said as I went by. While I was on deck, I tried to time the pitcher. He seemed fast, so I decided I'd better choke up, even though Mr. Winter didn't like it. The batter hit a couple of foul balls to right, then struck out. It was my turn, my first at-bat in the major leagues. My heart was thumping. I scratched a little hole for myself deep in the batter's box, brought the bat back, elbows pointed down, and faced the mound. I'll never forget the first pitch. 1 second the ball was in his hand, and the next instant it was in the catcher's mitt. "Strike 1," the umpire called. I swallowed, stepped out. I went over what Mr. Winter had said. "Pick up the ball right as it leaves the pitcher's hand." Again, the pitcher wound up and delivered. "Strike 2," the umpire called. I pounded the bat on the plate. "I'm not going to strike out looking," I told myself. "No matter what, I'm going to take a hack at it." But the final strike was like the first 2. The ball was by me before I could pull the trigger. "That's okay," Jimmy said when I returned to the bench. "Steve Cannon is the fastest pitcher in the league. He strikes out almost everybody." The next hitter bounced back to the box. Jimmy jumped up, grabbed his glove, and took the position at shortstop. I looked to the coach, but he didn't motion me to take the field. My Little League career was over. That night I took out the notebook I'd used to keep my stats from the games with Ang's Palace Mets. I looked at my high batting average, the RBIs and doubles. I couldn't believe how dumb I'd been planning to make a baseball card of myself, thinking that because I could hit in the minors, I was a good ball player. What a joke. I ripped that notebook to shreds. I was feeling real sorry for myself, like what had happened to me was the worst thing that had ever happened to anybody. Then the very next Saturday, Jimmy showed up at Henry Ford without his father. We played catch and 3 flies up and hit grounders to each other, but it wasn't until we were finished and were sitting on the grass that he told me what was up. "My father moved out last night," he said. "My parents are going to get a divorce." My mouth dropped open. Why? I managed. He grimaced. It's kind of complicated. My mother wants him to do stuff he doesn't want to do. I wanted to ask what, but I didn't have the guts. Once I got home, I told my mother. She surprised me. Divorce isn't the end of the world, Seth. Jimmy still will see his father. Mom, I said, you don't understand. It won't be the same. Jimmy won't have his father around to play ball and stuff. It's the worst thing that could have happened. She looked at me like I was missing something that was right in front of my face. For a few seconds, I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I understood. I walked down the hall into my room and felt ashamed of forgetting about my own father. Chapter 10, page 27. School had ended. Little League was over, but Jimmy and I still played baseball through the month of July. Other guys hung out around Henry Ford, so most days we could get up a game. Jimmy always arranged it so that we played on the same team. If somebody objected, Jimmy would shut him up. Seth and I are going to be a great double play combo at Woodside High, he'd say. We've got to practice together. Jimmy was all smiles those days, but he was real jumpy too. If a car pulled into the lot, he would always look over. I could see the hope in his eyes, but it was never his father. Never. As the weeks rolled by, the two of us did get better as a double play combination. We had the feel for each other. We both seemed to know what the other guy was going to do, and at the plate I was getting more than my share of base hits. My batting average was better than lots of guys who played in the majors in Little League. I figured on playing baseball all summer, but in August, guys started wearing their 49ers jerseys and bringing footballs. By the time the school started, Jimmy and I were the only guys still playing baseball. We'd play catch, then a little pepper. Jimmy would hit me grounders, and then I'd hit him grounders. The last thing he did was to throw batting practice at each other. When we were done, we'd lie on the grass and shoot the breeze. Mostly we'd talk about high school baseball and what it could lead to. Or maybe I should say Jimmy would talk about it. A lot of guys get drafted right out of high school, he said. You spend 2 or 3 years in the minors and then you get your shot at the big leagues. I'm going to be one of those guys, Seth. You wait and see. Like Jimmy, I fantasized about being a major leaguer, but I would never have told anyone. Steve Cannon had done more than blow the ball right by me. He'd blown a hole in my self-confidence, too. I don't think a day would go by when I didn't think about that strikeout. I'd be doing something, anything, and then, out of nowhere, the whole at-bat would come back to me like a black cloud I couldn't get out from under. That's why I asked Jimmy to start pitching hard to me, as hard as he could, during batting practice. Most of the time, you use batting practice to work on things you want to become automatic, like things like bunting, going to the opposite field with fastballs away. It's easier to practice the little things if the pitches are maybe 80% of full speed, but working on the little things makes sense only if you got the big things down. If I couldn't get around on a big-time heater, I was going nowhere on the diamond. When I told Jimmy I wanted him to throw his hardest, he wasn't crazy about it. I'm no pitcher. What if I hit you in the head? I'll get out of the way. Just throw hard. He shrugged. If that's what you want, but you're crazy. He was wild at first. His first 10 pitches were way outside, but then he started getting some over the plate, and I couldn't touch them. Everyone was by me before I could get the bat around. Jimmy thought it was a great joke. Call me Nolan Ryan, he screamed after I'd whiffed about 15 in a row. The Express. When we finished, we sat on the grass and he started talking for the millionth time about what a great double play combination we were going to be. Why don't you cut it out, I growled. What's eating you, he asked. I told him straight out, you're going to play Babe Ruth in high school ball, Jimmy, but I'm going to get cut. What are you talking about? Why would you get cut? That's how he was. If he wanted something to be true, then it was true. In case you haven't noticed, I said sarcastically, I can't hit a fastball. I watched my words sink in. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Finally, his face turned serious. You'll hit. We'll keep practicing until you do. That's a promise, Seth. The next Saturday, Jimmy gave me a gift, a new bat. It's the only time in my life anybody other than my mother or grandmother had given me something out of the blue. The bat was 32 inches long, but it weighed only 28 ounces. With a bat like this, he said, you'll be able to get around on a fastball better. Second basemen don't have to hit for power. Make contact and you'll be all right. And don't feel bad about the bat being light. Lots of major leaguers use light bats. He was trying to make it easy for me to switch to a light bat and not feel like a wimp. He didn't have to worry. I would have swung balsa wood if it meant I'd hit better. I didn't pound the ball that day, not by a long shot. All I managed were a few grounders towards second, but I hit the ball, and that was more than I'd done before, way before. Jimmy slapped me on the back when we finished. From the way he acted, you'd have thought I was ripping line drives into the outfield gaps. The truth is, I felt like I had been. Chapter 11, page 31. All through autumn, I'd go to the backyard after every afternoon and pound the ball against the wall to keep my fielding sharp. On weekends, Jimmy would pitch to me as hard as he could for as long as he could. Sometimes he'd pitch for so long I'd feel guilty. Your turn, I'd say. But if he had any life in his arm, he'd keep going. You need to practice more than I do, you bum. He could call me that, and I didn't care because I was getting better. Sometimes Jimmy even had to jump out of the way of a line drive I'd send right back up the middle. The day after Christmas, Jimmy told me his father had come by on Christmas Day. He says he's going to sign up for counseling. That's what my mother has always wanted. Great, I said. Maybe your parents will, He finished the sentence for me. Get back together? He pulled some grass out of the ground. If he does it, sure. He said he would, didn't he? Yeah, Jimmy answered, his voice tight. I poked him in the ribs. Come on, Jimmy, be happy. He looked at me and managed a smile. Chapter 12. This next thing that happened is a little weird, and I'm ashamed of it. It should have never happened. All I can say is that both Jimmy and I were 13 years old and that John Tustin was a lot older. We were at Henry Ford playing 3 flies up on a Sunday in late January. Jimmy had caught his 3rd fly ball and was running in to take the bat when Tustin showed up. Tustin lived on my block. I knew who he was, but since he was 16 or 17 years old, I'd never hung out with him. Actually, I'd always been afraid of him, though he'd never done anything to me. There was just something about him. That day he wanted to play ball with us. It seemed like an okay idea. One more guy would make the game better. Besides, when you're in 7th grade, it's hard to get rid of a high school kid. If we told him he couldn't play, he might have taken our stuff or pushed us around. Jimmy was up, but since Tustin was older, Jimmy held out the bat. As soon as one of us catches 3, then we get to hit, he told Tustin. Tustin yanked the bat from Jimmy. I know how to play. Right away we knew we'd made a mistake. Tustin tossed the ball too high and he didn't keep his eye on it. He missed half the time and the balls he hit were grounders. After Tustin had swung 24 times, Jimmy nor I had a catch, and it didn't look like we were ever going to get one. Why don't we play one fly up? Jimmy called to him. Tustin glared out. I can hit the ball, he screamed. He took a ferocious swing and missed. It would have been funny, except we were both scared. Tustin tossed the ball and swung again. This time he did connect solidly, only he pulled the bat out of the park and into the backyard of one of the houses behind Henry Ford. He pulled the ball, We peered over the fence for a few seconds. I guess it's lost, Jimmy said. I've got to go home anyway. Me too, I chimed in. Don't be in such a hurry, Tustin said. I want to show you guys something. Some other time, Jimmy said. My mom wants me home. Tustin stared him down. What do you mean? I've watched you guys lots of times. You play here for hours, he grinned. You'll like what I got to show you. I looked at Jimmy and he looked at me. We didn't really have anywhere to go or anything to do. Besides, we didn't have a clue as how to get rid of Tustin. We hid our gear behind the backstop and followed him up Goodwin Avenue to Stolsaft Park. There are no baseball fields or anything up there. It's more like a forest with hiking trails and cliffs and a little creek. Tustin led us up one of the trails. About every 50 yards, either Jimmy or I would ask him where we were going. Just shut up, he finally hissed. About a half mile up the trail, he pulled back some bushes and pointed. Through there. Jimmy and I ducked in. Tustin followed. When he let the bushes go, they snapped into place. We were in a small clearing. On the far side was a shack made of old planks of old wood. Inside were some old rusty wire chairs and a mattress. Tustin smiled. I bring all my girlfriends here. Only once had I seen Tustin with a girl. Jimmy and I sat in the old chairs. Tustin lay down on the mattress. You want a cigarette? Jimmy shook his head. Tustin held out a package toward me. How about you, Seth? Right here is where I don't understand myself. I'd never smoked, never wanted to smoke. What did I care about Tustin? Jimmy had turned him down cold. I should have done the same thing. I should have stuck with my friend, but I didn't. I took the cigarette. Tustin reached behind him and opened up an old box and pulled out a six-pack of Budweisers. He twisted the top off one and handed the bottle to me. Thanks, I said. He tried to hand one to Jimmy, but Jimmy wouldn't take it. Suit yourself, Tustin said. Just means more for me and Seth. More for Seth and me. He raised his bottle to his mouth and chugged about half of it. He wiped his mouth and grinned. This sure beats the hell out of playing baseball. I sipped my beer. It tasted bitter and warm. So is this what you wanted to show us? Jimmy said challengingly. Some old shack? Tustin scowled. He chugged the rest of his beer, then reached into the box again. This time he pulled out some magazines and tossed them toward us. Feast your eyes. I was in 7th grade, so it's not like I wasn't interested in sex, but Tustin's magazines were so totally sick they creeped me out. I could tell Jimmy felt the same. Pretty hot, aren't they? Tustin said, reaching around for another beer. Neither Jimmy nor I answered. You know what I do sometimes, Tustin went on? Sometimes I come up here in the afternoon and take off my clothes so that I'm nice and cool and comfortable. Then I lie back on this mattress and drink a few beers and flip through those magazines. He paused. You guys feel like doing that? Jimmy stood up. Get up, Seth. We're out of here. I stood. Jimmy headed across the clearing. As I started to follow, Tustin grabbed a hold of my arm. I tried to shake free, but Tustin's grip was strong. Let him go, Jimmy said. He doesn't have to go just because you're going, Tustin shot back. He's going because he wants to go, Jimmy yelled. Don't you, Seth? They both were staring at me. I could hardly speak. I want to go, I finally stammered. Tustin held me for a second before he shoved me away. Get out of here, both of you, but don't tell anybody about this place or I'll make you pay. We staggered across the clearing, scrambled through the bushes, stumbled onto the path. Then we both ran as fast as we could until we were back at Henry Ford. I half expected our gear to have been stolen, but it was still there. My baseball glove, my bat, my ball, none of them ever looked better. We didn't play catch or hit ground balls. We just sat behind the backstop. Jimmy squeezed the handle of his bat and took some half swings. I did the same. The wind was blowing through the high branches of the trees. Let's make a pact, Jimmy finally said. You and me. No cigarettes, no drinking, no drugs, no girls. Just baseball, okay? Okay, I said. It sounds corny, but we sort of touched bats then to seal the agreement. Whenever I think about that day, one thing always bothers me. What would have happened if Jimmy hadn't been there? I'd like to think that I would have left, that I was just about ready to get up and that Jimmy just beat me to it. But maybe that's a lie. Maybe I wouldn't have had the courage to leave. I hadn't wanted the cigarette, but I'd smoked it. I hadn't wanted the beer, but I'd drunk it. Maybe Jimmy saved me. Maybe without him, I would have done anything Tustin wanted me to do.